The airline scrambled the seating chart without warning. Rows reshuffled. A family split apart. The gate went quiet. Ryan moved first. He didn't blink when he jabbed a finger at their boarding passes, didn't hesitate for even a breath. This airline wasn't built for people like you. Families like yours don't get to sit together. His voice hit the terminal hard. Heads lifted. Shoulders tightened. Someone nearly dropped their boarding pass. A suitcase thudded as its owner jerked upright. Everyone could tell, Ryan had pulled this stunt before. But their mother wasn't someone who got pushed aside. A lawyer. Calm. Precise. Her eyes tracked every movement around her like evidence in motion. Whispers spread through the rows. People pretended to scroll, pretending not to see. Phones paused midair between recording and staying out of it. LaToya set her fingertips on the counter, light, steady, intentional. Every watching eye had a choice: step in, or let her stand alone. A bag slid closer to someone's leg. A child swung their feet, unaware of the storm tightening around them. If you want more stories of ordinary people facing moments like this, and what happens next, stay with us. Ryan's expression hardened. He dropped a clipboard so hard the counter trembled, an echo sharp enough to ripple across the polished floor. The family's breath caught at the same moment, a collected instinct sensing something deeper at stake. Naomi's hand moved to her chest. A tiny pause. A thin breath. Her condition wasn't obvious, not to the bystanders, not to the workers, but time apart carried a weight only the family could feel. LaToya stalled, only for a heartbeat. Trying to measure the right words, the right tone, the right move. Even strength comes with hesitation, even clarity falters under pressure. Passengers shuffled once more. Eyes dropped to screens. The terminal lights flickered across chrome fixtures, pulsing with a quiet anxiety that settled into every corner. Every tap of a foot, every held breath, every uneasy swallow in the crowd thickened the moment. Imagine standing here, watching them get separated, and saying nothing. Don't be that person. Like, comment, and subscribe. The gate agents tightened their formation the moment LaToya stepped forward. Protocol, that was the word they leaned on. The shield they hid behind. The excuse they delivered with calm, practiced voices that pretended neutrality while their eyes told a different story. Ryan straightened the lanyard around his neck, the badge swinging like a symbol of borrowed authority. We've reassigned the seats, he said, tone smooth, almost polite. It's already in the system. Nothing can be done now. The system felt like a wall dropped between them. A wall built on silent rules everyone recognized but no one dared name. Passengers nearby pretended to scroll, but their screens never moved. A woman coughed without needing to. A man pretended to tie his shoe, head dipped to avoid choosing a side. Naomi leaned into her mother, breath shallow again. The hitch was faint, but LaToya caught it the way only mothers do. Not panic, alert. Not pain, warning. She stepped closer to the counter. Separate seats are not acceptable, she said, voice measured, as if each word had been inspected before leaving her mouth. Ryan responded without blinking. It's standard procedure for overbooked flights. He didn't mention that 3 families before them had been rearranged with ease. He didn't mention the couple upgraded for free. He didn't mention the seats mysteriously unavailable when LaToya requested them, then magically cleared when others asked the same. Behind LaToya, a quiet voice spoke. You need to ask for the shift supervisor, a man whispered. He didn't move closer, just angled his body in a way that protected his identity. Advice without exposure. Allyship with caution. LaToya glanced back. A middle-aged traveler in a faded denim jacket, eyes steady but wary. Someone who'd seen this dance before. He gave her a subtle nod. Not encouragement, confirmation. Not heroism, truth. If you've ever watched bias unfold in front of you and pretended it wasn't your business, take a second to comment why. Ryan tapped a few keys. His coworker leaned in, whispering something that made him stiffen. A corporate phrase. A rehearsed line. A quiet reveal of what this really was. Per updated guidance, she murmured, we're supposed to avoid seat clustering with high-risk demographics. High risk. The term floated between them like smoke from something burning under the surface. LaToya didn't react outwardly, but the man in denim flinched. He'd heard it too. A few passengers shifted as though the air had changed temperature. Define high risk, LaToya said softly. Ryan swallowed. That's just what we were told. He didn't repeat it. He didn't have to. The message was already carved into the room. Naomi breathed in slow, deliberate pulls. Her brother rubbed her back, trying to seem calm. LaToya steadied herself. Logic in her mind. Fear in her chest. Her daughter's heartbeat in her memory. The man in denim spoke again, still barely audible. You need to push for medical priority boarding. Heart condition counts. LaToya nodded once. Not agreement, permission. A mother accepting help she didn't want to need. Ryan exhaled sharply. We can't offer priority for everyone, he insisted, voice climbing. We're following the system's instructions. The system. Always the system. Passengers felt it now, the imbalance. Authority towering over one family while pretending neutrality. Silence spreading like fog as every bystander tried to avoid being pulled into the truth. Naomi pressed a hand to her chest again, the movement small but unmistakable. LaToya saw it. Ryan didn't. Or maybe he refused to. If you've ever felt powerless inside a system you expected to protect you, like this video so more people see it. The supervisor finally approached. Clipboard tucked tight. Expression unreadable. Austerity wrapped in politeness. Let's resolve this quickly, she said, tone clipped. But her first glance wasn't at LaToya. It was at Ryan. Confirming whether his version would be the version. The imbalance crystallized. One family. Two staff members. A system backing itself. A crowd too careful to interfere. LaToya inhaled. Her daughter's condition. Their separation. The quiet prejudice wrapped in protocol. And the truth that she couldn't win this alone. Imagine watching a family get pulled apart in public. Would you look away or speak up? Share this so someone else doesn't. Tension lingered over the gate like humidity, thick, unmoving, waiting for someone to breathe wrong. The staff resumed their postures, each of them pretending the situation wasn't spiraling. But LaToya saw everything. Not with panic. With the trained eye of a woman who had spent years navigating rooms where she wasn't expected to hold her ground. She scanned the terminal. Gate number. Camera placements. Staff positioning. Exit routes. She wasn't preparing for a fight, she was preparing for a record. Her mind moved quickly, but not flawlessly. Little hesitations cracked through her composure, tiny falters only someone watching closely would notice. Her fingers lingered half a second too long on her daughter's shoulder. Her jaw tightened when Ryan scribbled something on a slip of paper, hiding it beneath his palm. Her breath caught when Naomi steadied herself against the wall. She wasn't a war machine. She was a mother who knew she had to be sharp even when she was tired. If you've ever had to stay strong while shaking inside, hit like, your story matters. A memory surfaced. Not dramatic. Not public. Just a quiet courtroom hallway from years ago, the slap of dress shoes echoing against marble. That was the day she filed a lawsuit that changed the HR practices of an entire corporation. The settlement wasn't what mattered, the aftermath was. She'd gained something more valuable, patterns. Behaviors. How discrimination hides behind policy. And right now, she recognized the same choreography playing out in front of her. The deferential tone. The faux calm language. The strategic delays. The paper forms designed to eat time. The blame passed upward to a faceless system. The airline wasn't improvising. This was routine. She glanced again at Clark. The woman's jawline twitched every time LaToya used legal terms. Not visibly. Not enough for the untrained eye. But enough for LaToya to file away. Her thoughts sharpened, they don't know who they're dealing with. Not in a self-glorifying way, just fact. If you've ever recognized a pattern because you lived through it before, tap share so others can spot it too. Behind her, the man in denim subtly shifted closer. He didn't speak again, but the slight tilt of his phone was unmistakable. He was recording. Not aggressively. Not for drama. Quietly, like someone who understood how evidence works. A woman near the window angled her seat, phone resting on her thigh, camera silently aimed. She didn't raise it. She didn't zoom. She just let it run. Another ally, not loud, not heroic, but present. LaToya caught their reflections in the polished floor. The fractured images told a more honest story than anything the staff was pretending to uphold. Her kids. The tension. The watchers. The staff's stiff shoulders. The man recording. A shared agency forming. Invisible, but real. Naomi inhaled again, a little too deeply. A little too slow. LaToya's hand moved instantly, steadying her without drawing attention. She didn't want her child's condition to become a spectacle. But the truth was cruel: the longer this dragged on, the more dangerous it became. Another memory slipped in, uninvited. The night Naomi collapsed on the living room floor. The frantic drive. The diagnosis. The promise LaToya made in the ER parking lot: never again will you suffer because someone else hesitates. Her eyes hardened. Just slightly. If you know what it's like to carry a promise that heavy, comment I understand. A loudspeaker chimed overhead. Flight 478 to Phoenix, final preparations. The announcement sliced through the tension, drawing even more eyes toward the unfolding fight. Then came the shift. The part no one expected. 2 staff members stepped through a side door, clipboard, tablet, matching expressions. They whispered to Clark. Not long. Not dramatic. Just enough. And LaToya's instincts hummed. She recognized that look. That bracing. That brace yourself, we're about to enforce something ugly posture. Clark straightened. Ma'am, she said, choosing her words carefully, we've received internal instruction to maintain your assigned seating. Internal instruction. Formal. Scripted. Suspiciously confident. LaToya felt the shift immediately. This wasn't Ryan freelancing anymore. This wasn't personal bias accidentally exposed. This was systemic. Protected. Directed. Her voice lowered. Internal instruction from whom? Clark hesitated. Operations. Operations. A convenient ghost. The wizard behind the curtain corporations use when they need someone else to hold the blame. But LaToya knew that phrase too well. Operations meant upper management. Operations meant oversight. Operations meant someone had pulled her file the moment she raised her voice. And then, another realization: the airline had been in headlines last month. Federal probe. Internal complaints. Quiet settlements. Accusations of targeting families with certain profiles. She hadn't followed the story closely at the time. But she remembered enough. Plot twist number 1 wasn't manufactured. It was unfolding in real time. If you've ever seen a company hide behind a system to avoid accountability, tag someone who knows this game too well. Passengers exchanged glances now, their discomfort no longer hidden. Someone whispered, "This feels wrong." Another murmured, "Why are they escalating this?" A ripple. A shift. A collective awareness forming. The man in denim cleared his throat. "I don't think their system is the problem," he said quietly. "I think their system is working exactly how they want it to." Clark's eyes flicked toward him. A warning. A reminder that employees weren't the only ones who could lose control of the narrative. LaToya felt something settle in her chest, steady, measured, but resolute. This wasn't going away. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an accident. This was a structure. A structure she had fought before. A structure she had beaten before. And she wasn't alone this time. Stories like these aren't always told. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The boarding announcement cracked across the gate area with that hollow, over-processed ring airport speakers always have, the kind that scrapes attention even when no one wants it. The family didn't move at first. They were waiting for clarity, waiting for someone to fix the seats that had been scattered across the cabin like an afterthought. But no one approached. No one spoke. The only thing that shifted was the supervisor stepping back to his podium, hands clasped behind him like the issue had already been resolved in his favor. Passengers filtered past them, glancing sideways but pretending not to stare. A woman with a stroller offered a tiny sympathetic nod before forcing her eyes back to her boarding pass as if the gesture itself might get her in trouble. The air around the gate felt layered, like everyone sensed the wrongness but no one wanted to be the one who said it out loud. LaToya gathered the boarding passes again, double-checking the mismatched seat numbers she already knew by heart. She didn't sigh. She didn't curse. She simply steadied her breath the way people do when they can feel themselves being watched. Her fingers touched the corner of Naomi's medical note inside her bag, an instinct more than a decision. She wasn't going to use it yet. But she needed to know it was there. Jared stood beside her, quiet and alert. His silence wasn't resignation. It was calculation, the kind men learn from a lifetime of walking into rooms already stacked against them. His eyes tracked the supervisor, then the attendant with the clipboard, then the security officer who hovered too close for a routine boarding situation. The gate agent lifted the mic again. Group 3, now boarding. That was them. Reluctantly, the family stepped into the boarding lane. The murmurs around them thinned into a strange hush. Even the boarding scanner's beep sounded sharper, more judgmental. The moment Jared moved forward, the supervisor angled his body into the narrow lane, blocking just enough space to assert control without looking overtly aggressive. "Sir, before you board, I need to remind you that assigned seating must be followed. There will be no reseating requests once aboard." The tone was clipped, crisp, and dipped in condescension. A warning disguised as policy. Jared didn't flinch. "We're not requesting anything. We're trying to understand why our seats were changed." The supervisor blinked slowly, the way people do when they think the conversation should have already ended in their favor. "Sir, this is for operational safety." A rehearsed phrase. A shield. But his eyes were betraying him, flicking past Jared, lingering on LaToya, then sliding back to the uniformed staff clustered behind him. Coordination. Quiet justification. The kind that builds a wall without anyone saying they're building one. A woman, two people behind them leaned forward just enough to whisper toward LaToya without disrupting the line. "Record everything. They pull this kind of thing on families like yours." Her voice barely carried, but the advice landed like a hand slipping a tool into LaToya's pocket. An ally. Subtle. Human. Necessary. If you would have kept walking too. Don't. Comment your first instinct. Inside the jet bridge, the temperature dropped 2 degrees. The hum of ventilation reverberated like a warning tone. Their footsteps echoed along the metal floor, a snake of sound stretching between them and the cabin. Halfway down, their youngest child tugged at LaToya's sleeve. "Why aren't we sitting together?" LaToya hesitated, choosing her words with care. "Because someone made a mistake. And Mommy's fixing it." But mistake didn't feel accurate. Not with the way the supervisor followed them at a measured distance, like an overseer ensuring the problem passengers didn't deviate from the plane's intended path. The moment they stepped into the aircraft doorway, the lead flight attendant greeted the passengers ahead of them with warm, performative hospitality. But when the family reached the threshold, her smile thinned into a professional mask. "Welcome aboard." Not unfriendly. But not welcoming either. Neutral in the way neutrality becomes a choice. Rows 15, 22, and 27, 3 scattered seats. The absurdity of the separation became more visible under the harsh cabin lights. LaToya stepped forward. "Ma'am, our seats were changed without explanation. We need to understand who authorized." The attendant raised a hand in a soft, pacifying gesture. "We'll take care of that once everyone is seated." A polite dismissal. The kind meant to make the requester feel unreasonable for even asking. LaToya tried again, more precise this time. FAA regulations require reasonable effort to seat minors with family. And there it was. The misstep. She cited the correct rule, but she referenced subsection B before subsection A. A trivial detail. A tiny stumble. Yet the attendant seized on it like it invalidated the entire concern. Ma'am, that rule applies to unaccompanied minors, which is not the case here. Incorrect. But said with confidence. Confidence can drown out correctness when the wrong person is wearing the uniform. LaToya's cheeks warmed, not with shame, but with the sting of being dismissed when she knew she was right. Human vulnerability bleeding through her precision. She inhaled once, steadying her voice. Behind her, Jared lifted their bags overhead, watching everything, the supervisors still lurking, the attendants shifting posture, the other passengers pretending not to listen but listening anyway. The cabin tightened around them. A man in row 8 angled his phone downward, not enough to be obvious, but enough to capture the interaction under the guise of reading a text. A college student near the window pressed her call button, then canceled it. A nervous tick, but it sent a tiny alert to the front galley anyway. Someone else opened the safety card and pretended to read while glancing over the top. Agency wasn't loud. It was accumulating in whispers and glances and pressed buttons. Some record injustice. Others scroll past, like and share if you refuse to be the latter. Then the shift. A man in an unremarkable polo stepped out from the forward galley, carrying nothing, scanning nothing, but his presence rippled through the supervisor's confidence. His eyes drifted toward LaToya, then toward the staff cluster, then back with a steady, analytical focus. He wasn't crew. He wasn't a pilot. He wasn't a typical passenger. But the recognition in the supervisor's face confirmed it. The air marshal. Stationed on this flight by coincidence, not design. He didn't intervene. Marshals rarely do unless it's critical. But his acknowledgement of the situation, silent, observing, assessing, was enough to alter the gravitational pull inside the cabin. The supervisor stiffened. The lead attendant's voice lost a degree of its previous certainty. Even the secondary attendant paused mid-sentence when she noticed him. LaToya noticed the shift, too, not as empowerment, but as recalibrated possibility. She stepped closer again. I need the name of whoever approved the reassignment, and I need it documented. The attendant swallowed. Ma'am. We'll handle your concerns once we depart. A stall tactic. But now the marshal was watching the exchange. Watching her precision. Watching the staff's unease. Passengers caught the tension. Shoulders stiffened. A child stopped kicking the seat in front of him. Someone coughed, too loudly, then regretted the sound cutting through the silence. The air tasted like anticipation, thin, metallic, charged. LaToya inhaled deeply. Her earlier stumble didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the pressure building in the room, the pressure the staff could feel now that a federal officer was observing their choices. Jared leaned in, voice low. They're rattled. Stay steady. Rattled wasn't victory? Rattled was warning. Rattled meant the next move mattered double. The supervisor cleared his throat. Ma'am, please take your seat so we can complete final checks. But his voice had lost its edge. The marshal was still watching. Still recording everything in that quiet, official mind of his. Power no longer sat neatly on one side of the aisle. The system rarely plays fair. Subscribe so you'll see exactly how this one unfolds. The plane hummed under low engines, passengers shifting uneasily in their seats. LaToya Wilcox held her boarding pass loosely, though her fingers were far from idle. Every inch of the cabin was catalogued in her mind, the angle of the overhead lights, the positioning of the crew, the subtle expressions of tension in those around her. You've seen unfairness happen quietly. What would you do if it was right in front of you? Comment below and subscribe to see who steps up. Ryan Patterson patrolled the aisle with the measured stride of someone convinced he still controlled the room. His uniform crisp, shoulders squared, face a mask of polite authority. He stopped near Jared, leaning just enough to block his line of sight without drawing outright attention. "Sir, we need you seated," Ryan said, voice neutral, but the weight behind it made it a command. Not a request. Jared's hands tightened around the armrests, not loud, not visible to anyone who didn't look closely, but enough to speak volumes to Latoya. She noted it. Every small micro-reaction was data. A subtle whisper rolled from the back row. A passenger, notebook in hand, shifted closer, eyes darting between Latoya and Ryan. Not obvious, not intended for the crew's notice, but enough to plant the seed of accountability. Allies were watching. Allies were recording. Allies were acting. "You think silence is harmless?" tagged someone who should see how small actions matter. Latoya lifted her hand slightly, signaling subtly to the seated ally without breaking composure. Her eyes scanned, calculated, measuring the reaction of each steward. Some glanced up, some down, some kept their placid facades. But the microaggressions were there, layered in the crew's hurried adjustments and clipped tones. The unspoken message, "This isn't for you. Sit down. Comply." She knew the FAA rules by heart. They had been her study for months, memorized in long hours before this flight. And yet, when she cited the specific subsection aloud, the steward merely tilted his head, feigning confusion, brushing past the requirement with casual indifference. Human vulnerability, just a fraction, but enough to test her control. She allowed a minor pause in her response, letting it register, letting the silence stretch. When the rules favor the wrong side, do we notice, or look away? Subscribe to see who refuses to. From the aisle, a figure shifted, someone in a business suit, briefcase clutched to the chest, tablet open, screens already flickering with internal corporate chatter. A shareholder. Silent, unseen, but tapping into emails, forwarding quietly to journalists, leaking the first hint of internal scrutiny. The aircraft was not just a cabin. It was a stage. The players were unaware, but the audience was growing. Every glance Latoya caught, every nervous adjustment of a tie, every cough that didn't match the rhythm of the engines, added layers to the mounting tension. The hum of the aircraft became a counterpoint to the quiet dissonance in the cabin, the unspoken contest of observation versus compliance. A flight attendant leaned toward Ryan, whispering something that seemed benign, but Latoya's sharp ears caught the inflection. There was hesitation, subtle doubt in the voice of someone trained to obey. Micro-leverage, she noted. Allies were affecting outcomes without a single word spoken aloud to the wrong people. Latoya's daughter, Naomi, shifted in her seat, unaware of the calculation unfolding. Her small hand brushed the armrest, a heartbeat away from revealing a silent anxiety. Latoya caught it, registering the pause, acknowledging the human cost of each minute this flight remained chaotic. It was invisible to the majority, but each second was a spike in stakes. Ryan's jaw tightened. He moved toward the galley, clipboard in hand, glancing back just enough to broadcast authority while revealing impatience. Not overt, just enough to keep the tension taut. Every subtle movement of his was a message, "I am control." Every subtle action of Latoya was a counter-message, "I am watching, I am calculating, I will use what I see." Passengers shifted again. Small coughs, adjustments of bags, fingers brushing receipts, eyes flicking from seat to seat. Nobody knew the full measure of what they were witnessing, but they felt it. The air compressed in the cabin as if it too understood the imbalance of power, the quiet cracks forming in the facade of control. Some people record injustice. Some just scroll past. Comment if you'd do more than watch. Subscribe to follow the fallout. Latoya called the airline's legal hotline. Her voice calm, deliberate, precise. On the other end, voices hurried, scripts broken, the cadence of protocol collapsing under her quiet insistence. The crew reacted with visible scrambling, yet it was not perfect. Missteps, hesitations, and missed connections wove a tapestry of uncertainty. Her plan had gaps, yes, but each gap was being observed, noted, and willfully amplified by unseen actors in the cabin. A camera lens from a nearby seat tilted toward the aisle, capturing subtle micro-gestures, a steward's hand brushing paperwork, Ryan's tightening grip on the clipboard, LaToya's poised fingers tapping lightly on the counter. Allies became participants, participants became witnesses, witnesses became the quiet pressure shaping every move. The tension between action and observation created a slow-burning kinetic energy. The hum of engines, the shuffle of passengers, the distant clatter of a tray table, it all became part of a rhythm that only those attuned could interpret. LaToya read it, timing each pause, each shift, each glance. The narrative of control was fracturing, imperceptibly but inexorably. Ryan leaned back slightly, scanning the cabin. The subtle alerts, the offhand whispers, the nervous alignments of passengers, it was more than protocol. The system he relied on to maintain authority was eroding, particle by particle, under the observation of a mother who refused to be invisible, and a cabin slowly awakening to its complicity. Tag someone who needs to see this story, don't let inaction define you. Subscribe to witness the unfolding courage. By the time the flight attendants stabilized the cabin, the imbalance was clear. Not overtly, not in announcements, not in loud confrontation, but in the way Ryan hesitated just a fraction too long at each intervention, in the way passengers' gazes held onto LaToya instead of him, in the way unseen allies circulated information beyond the cabin walls. The small movements mattered. The flicker of an eye. The tilt of a head. The hesitation before a compliance check. LaToya catalogued it all, micro-strategically. The plane was no longer just a flight, it was a crucible. Every second separated her family, every microaggression amplified the stakes, and every hidden act of observation stacked the power slowly, invisibly, against Ryan's assumed authority. As Naomi shifted again, LaToya caught her breath, not just for her daughter, but for every potential observer who might yet step forward. One small act of courage, one subtle intervention, one recorded moment could tilt the weight of systemic bias. It was quiet. It was slow. It was deliberate. And it was far from over. The plane's wheels grounded with a muted thud that barely contained the tension building inside the cabin. LaToya Wilcox stood, fingers brushing the counter with precision, her eyes sweeping the rows of passengers who had been quietly observing, quietly calculating alongside her. Every gaze she met reinforced a shared understanding, the stakes were higher than protocol or flight times. This was human leverage. Ryan Patterson's expression tightened as the engines powered down. Authority clung to him like a second skin, but the subtle shifts in passengers' posture, the hushed murmurs, and the keen eyes tracking every move chipped away at it, almost imperceptibly. What would you do if you saw power abused quietly? Don't just scroll, comment your choice. A flight attendant passed behind LaToya, clipboard slightly trembling in hands that had once delivered calm service. The crew had followed protocol until it became clear the room's authority was shifting. Their movements were precise, careful, signaling compliance while observing the new balance forming. From the back, Yvonne Richardson held up her phone, small enough that no one noticed at first. The footage she released was unedited, raw. Every micro-expression, every tiny infraction captured, and the moment of injustice recorded for the world beyond this grounded aircraft. It was the subtle power of truth amplified by technology and courage. When injustice is recorded, do you watch, or act? Tag someone who would intervene. LaToya inhaled, deliberate and calm. Every decision mattered, her tone, her stance, the cadence of her words. She introduced herself to the cabin staff, then to Ryan directly. I'm LaToya Wilcox, counsel and advocate. Let's clarify the procedures we are following today. Her voice carried precision, authority, not confrontation, but control, absolute yet restrained. The cabin reacted in tiny, human ways. Passengers straightened. Fingers tightened on armrests. Eyes flicked toward the monitors where Yvonne's recording silently circulated. Even the most hesitant among the crowd sensed the shift, the quiet acknowledgement that power was no longer centralized solely with Ryan. Don't let silent observation make you complicit. Like, share, and subscribe to see how authority is challenged. Then, the human complication emerged. A man stepped forward from the executive team, name badge glinting under the cabin lights. Jared's estranged cousin, the airline exec, stood poised yet visibly tense. Years of personal history, unspoken grievances, and complex family ties now layered over the already tense scenario. LaToya noted it all. The small smirk, the hesitation before the formal greeting, the way Ryan's shoulders shifted subtly, his posture a fraction more defensive. The human element complicated the equation, yet LaToya adapted, her procedural knowledge now fully amplified by observation, allies, and real-time strategy. Passengers whispered. Someone coughed. Phones lifted discreetly. A notebook flipped open, pen poised, capturing actions and reactions with meticulous care. Allies were active, participatory, without breaking protocol, without creating chaos. The shared agency of observation and documentation quietly rebalanced authority. If you saw control slipping from someone abusing it, would you intervene, or scroll past? Comment below and subscribe. Ryan moved toward the back, attempting to reclaim the perceived dominance. The clipboard hit the counter with a controlled slam, a sound meant to command attention, to reassert authority. But it met eyes that no longer deferred, expressions registering measured, analytical observation. The silence was louder than any confrontation could be. LaToya seized the moment. We need the full seating plan, crew rosters, and passenger list. Let's ensure compliance with FAA regulations and airline protocol, she stated, voice unwavering. Her authority wasn't declared, it was displayed, undeniable in the way she commanded attention, in the way the cabin responded without her raising her voice. Seeing someone demand accountability, would you stay silent, or act? Tag someone who should. Yvonne's phone glowed. The footage streamed to multiple devices, each passenger now a participant in exposure, each observer a potential amplifier. The cage of quiet compliance Ryan had relied on was cracking. Every small act, shuffling papers, leaning closer to watch, noting a crew hesitation, was magnified by technology, by courage, by collective awareness. A steward whispered instructions to Ryan, but the words barely landed, the true message had shifted. Power was no longer a top-down command. It was distributed, invisible yet potent. The cabin became a crucible, a microcosm of systemic checks, vulnerabilities, and the emergent strength of shared observation. When you witness subtle power abuse, do you watch or respond? Comment, share, and subscribe to see real-world courage unfold. LaToya's eyes scanned the exec, Ryan, the crew, and the passengers. Micro-adjustments were noted, small hesitations catalogued, and gaps in authority exploited not aggressively, but strategically. Every procedural citation, every reference to law, every quiet nod from a passenger observing carefully reinforced the shift. Passengers leaned slightly forward in their seats, leaning into accountability without words. Phones stayed poised. Bags shifted to track movement. Eyes followed her hands as she worked, the deliberate brushing of a counter, the small gestures that indicated control without aggression. Allies amplified, subtly, consistently. Would you quietly support justice, or stay a bystander? Tag, comment, and subscribe to witness the ripple effect. The estranged cousin exchanged a glance with Ryan. Unspoken tensions, personal history layered over professional conflict, added a human unpredictability to the mix. LaToya noted it, adjusted, shifted. She didn't just react, she anticipated, using every micro detail to her advantage. Ryan's face hardened. His posture stiffened. The authority he believed absolute was no longer unquestioned. Every small act of observation, documentation, and strategic movement challenged him, exposing procedural gaps he hadn't anticipated. Allies' subtle actions were as powerful as any direct confrontation. When authority falters, do you seize the moment, or look away? Comment and share if you would act. Subscribe to see how control can be challenged. The cabin breathed collectively, tension stretching taut, then easing slightly as the countermove unfolded. LaToya's calm, procedural authority, combined with Allies' discrete amplification, began reshaping the narrative of control in real time. The plane, the crew, the passengers, every element now part of a complex dance where power was no longer unilateral. Phones hovered halfway to faces. Not recording yet, but poised. Observers were ready. Microaggressions, previously unchallenged, were noted and amplified silently. Every subtle deflection, every hesitant word, every flicker of uncertainty in Ryan's posture now weighed heavily against his once assumed dominance. Would you stand quietly as power is misused, or step in? Comment, tag someone, and subscribe to follow the shift. By the time the cabin crew and Ryan adjusted to the new balance, LaToya had established control without raising her voice, without confrontation beyond procedural assertion. Allies observed, documented, and amplified. Yvonne's unedited footage traveled beyond the cabin. The human complication of Jared's cousin layered tension, but it did not destabilize her strategy. It became another lever to demonstrate authority and collective accountability. The plane, grounded physically yet charged with the kinetic energy of ethical reckoning, held every person in the moment. Every micro-movement mattered. Every gaze, every finger, every breath was part of a subtle, emergent power dynamic. And LaToya, calculated, poised, and supported, guided it expertly. If you saw an unjust system being challenged, would you act, or pretend it's not happening? Comment below and subscribe to see the rest of the story unfold. The terminal was electric, but not the kind of excitement anyone would want. Whispers, hurried footsteps, the soft squeak of polished shoes against the marble floors, every movement seemed magnified. Screens flickered with boarding information, but no one noticed the flights listed. They were all watching something far more urgent. LaToya Wilcox stood tall in the center of the storm. Her hands rested lightly on her briefcase, calm but poised. Around her, the black family she had vowed to protect waited, their breaths shallow, eyes darting between Ryan Patterson and the chaotic scene he had unleashed. He was still standing at the counter, confident in his control, shoulders squared, but there was a subtle shift, a crack in the armor that only some could perceive. The first wave of cameras flashed. Passengers who had been silently observing finally pulled out phones, capturing the unfolding confrontation. Small bursts of murmurs echoed, growing louder, more deliberate. Some whispered support to the family, others leaned back, pretending to remain neutral. The terminal had become a theater, and everyone was part of the audience. If you've ever stayed silent while injustice unfolded, comment below what held you back. Ryan's eyes scanned the crowd, trying to reassert dominance. He barked procedural lines, citing regulations, as if they alone could cover up the deep unease creeping into his posture. But LaToya was already in motion, mentally and strategically. Every word, every pause, she calculated, every observer could be a potential ally or a witness to failure. Then came the first crack in Ryan's control. From the crowd, Yvonne Richardson, a passenger and seasoned journalist, stepped forward subtly, phone held at an angle to capture unedited footage. Her actions were quiet, almost invisible, but deliberate. LaToya's sharp eyes caught it. Allies were quietly taking initiative, and the momentum was beginning to shift. If you ever looked away when rules favored the wrong side, like Ryan tried, share this to make others watch closely. LaToya's voice carried just enough to cut through the low hum of tension. She requested clarity on the seating policy, citing precise FAA guidance and referencing a pending federal investigation into airline practices. The crew flinched at the specificity. For the first time, Ryan hesitated, brow furrowing as procedural gaps in his knowledge became apparent. Microaggressions from staff, tiny pauses, fleeting eye rolls, and careful shifts in stance, hinted at unease in their ranks. A ripple of whispers passed across the terminal as passengers murmured about what they were witnessing. Phones tilted to capture the growing narrative. A young man in a nearby row nudged a woman beside him, pointing toward the counter. Conversations that had been dead moments ago now hummed quietly, anxious but aware. When you see authority misused, tag someone who needs to understand this moment. Then the shareholder acted. Eduardo McDonald, seated mid-terminal, leaned over to whisper into a phone while simultaneously sending an anonymous tip to media outlets. The leak was subtle, strategic, yet enough to ensure the story could no longer be contained. Ryan's carefully constructed control had begun to crumble from multiple directions: LaToya's calm authority, the proactive crowd, and now external exposure. LaToya weighed her next steps. She knew the stakes. Naomi's heart condition was a silent variable in every decision, every shuffle of passengers, every pause in Ryan's speech. Each moment separated heightened risk, but LaToya's hesitation was tactical, not fear. She allowed Ryan just enough rope, letting his overconfidence reveal cracks for the onlookers to see. The plane's announcement system clicked overhead, a mundane reminder of impending departure. LaToya's hand rested on the counter, deliberate, while her eyes swept the room. Each shifting passenger, each phone slowly raised, each whispered conversation became part of a larger, unspoken network of witnesses. Allies were visible now, and Ryan's performance as the ultimate authority was being quietly dismantled. Some watch injustice silently, hit like if you're ready to act next time. The first video clip went live on social media. Passengers around LaToya whispered, sharing phone screens, their collective observation amplifying the weight of Ryan's missteps. Corporate observers, alerted remotely, started to scramble. Emails, texts, and calls flew faster than the airline could respond. The veneer of control Ryan had maintained for so long was cracking visibly. Yvonne stepped back, letting the footage speak for itself, while LaToya moved closer to the counter, commanding the space. She didn't raise her voice unnecessarily. Her calmness was a weapon, her procedural knowledge another. Ryan's gestures became sharper, more desperate. He pointed, leaned, tried to assert dominance, but the crowd no longer flinched. They had seen the unfolding story. If you've ever felt the power of collective action, subscribe to see more moments where truth prevails. LaToya's co-counsels arrived quietly, sliding into position near the gate. They coordinated unobtrusively, directing passenger witnesses, reviewing procedural gaps, and preparing for potential legal leverage. Each member of the team was a silent signal to Ryan: control was no longer his alone. Phones continued to record, some passengers streaming live. The weight of observation was immense, like a living audit of Ryan's every move. Staff exchanged nervous glances, some trying to rationalize policy, others simply frozen by the exposure. The systemic imbalance that had seemed unshakable at the gate was now vulnerable, seen by hundreds, captured for millions. LaToya spoke softly to Jared, her tone calm but loaded with authority, outlining her next tactical step. She was the pivot around which the moment now turned. Ryan's posture stiffened, his shadow fell differently, the terminal's light catching every line of tension. Then Yvonne released the unedited footage. The moment went viral in seconds. Social media notifications buzzed across passengers' phones, sending small ripples through the crowd. A subtle shift occurred. Ryan realized this wasn't just one family's struggle, this was a narrative expanding beyond the terminal, beyond his control. What would you do if you saw power abused quietly? Comment your choice and share this to make others watch. By now, LaToya's authority was amplified, not by intimidation but by procedure, by strategy, by the visible support of allies and passengers who refused to remain passive. Ryan's initial dismissal was gone, replaced with hesitation and the faintest shadow of regret. Every action, every subtle maneuver, every eye in the terminal contributed to a growing systemic pressure. Observers shared insights, highlighted procedural failures, and documented every interaction. The collective power of the environment, orchestrated through calm precision and tactical foresight, made Ryan's authority appear fragile. The terminal, once a mundane checkpoint in routine travel, had transformed into a stage of accountability. The family, LaToya's team, and observing passengers had orchestrated a counterweight to systemic bias and personal arrogance. When power shifts quietly, you need to be watching, subscribe to witness these moments unfold. And as the terminal buzzed, cameras rolling and phones streaming, one truth was undeniable: the moment had shifted irreversibly. Authority had been questioned. Procedure had been exposed. Allies had acted. The silent witnesses had chosen action. And Ryan Patterson had been forced to confront what happens when underestimated strength meets collective vigilance. The press swarm had grown dense, a living wall of lenses and microphones pointed directly at the Black family who had endured the gate confrontation just hours ago. The air smelled faintly of coffee and polished metal, but beneath it, tension hummed like electricity. Every reporter, every camera operator, every bystander knew they were witnessing a story that had already begun to ripple far beyond the terminal walls. LaToya Wilcox stood at the center, composed, shoulders squared, her briefcase at her side like a shield and a symbol. Jared Ball, her husband, and their children flanked her. Relief mingled with residual tension. The reunion had happened, but the fight wasn't over. The family's micro-moments, handholds, shared glances, subtle reassurances, spoke volumes about the human cost behind the headlines. If you've ever underestimated the power of small acts, comment below what quiet courage you've witnessed. Airline executives approached, their steps careful, measured, trying to reclaim a sense of control that had long since slipped through their fingers. One offer came first, a position, framed as gratitude for LaToya's expert guidance. But she declined calmly, her voice steady, her decision deliberate. She wasn't here for personal gain. Her focus was systemic, procedural, and rooted in long-term justice. The reporters' pens paused. Microphones lingered near LaToya's mouth as she spoke, each word precise but measured, revealing strategy without the need for theatrics. "This isn't about employment," she said. "It's about ensuring fairness for every passenger who boards this airline in the future." All around her, allies who had remained quietly engaged through the unfolding chaos now made themselves visible in subtle, potent ways. Yvonne Richardson adjusted a camera angle to ensure the family remained framed correctly. Eduardo McDonald handed a quietly captured document to a journalist, showing procedural lapses. Small passengers shared footage, discreetly highlighting microaggressions and discrepancies in airline protocol. These were micro-victories, collective and deliberate. If you've ever witnessed quiet action turn the tide, share this story so others see the power of collaboration. The airline staff, once confident, now reflected cracks in expression. A manager whispered to a supervisor, realizing that the story could no longer be contained. Ryan Patterson, still present but noticeably diminished, shifted uncomfortably under observation. His attempts to regain authority were undermined not by confrontation, but by the visible, procedural, and collaborative strength surrounding LaToya. Every small gesture mattered. A child handed a boarding pass to a crew member with a pointed pause, demonstrating the family's presence and vigilance. A passenger returned a dropped notebook to another, silently reinforcing order amidst chaos. LaToya's calm had allowed these micro-actions to coalesce into visible leverage without dominating the narrative herself. When you see preparation and collaboration win, hit like and encourage others to watch closely. LaToya's voice remained steady as she walked reporters through the timeline of events. She highlighted the incremental victories, procedural reminders, ally interventions, and collective documentation that had amplified the family's agency. Every micro-movement mattered, the slight nod of a witness, the quiet handover of evidence, the careful positioning of cameras. Together, they formed a lattice of accountability around systemic power that had previously seemed untouchable. The airline's offer, initially framed as a reward, now appeared performative. LaToya declined publicly, but the message was subtle yet clear: systemic leverage was not about personal gain, it was about preparation, collaboration, and the quiet persistence required to expose and correct entrenched bias. Small victories matter. Subscribe to see how change grows and spreads quietly but powerfully. Media coverage surged. Stories were shared, rewritten, reposted, and analyzed. Passengers who had initially avoided involvement were now commenting, liking, and tagging friends to draw attention to procedural flaws. Each action, no matter how minor, contributed to a growing wave of accountability. LaToya's family observed the scene with cautious relief. Naomi's hand hovered near her chest, a reminder of the stakes hidden from the public eye. Every micro-movement, her slight pause, her careful breathing, was mirrored in LaToya's own subtle adjustments. The family's collective presence, calm but vigilant, created a ripple effect of moral pressure. Staff members, still present, exchanged micro-expressions of unease. Small nods, slight withdrawals, averted eyes, all signaled the gradual recognition that their system of authority had been tested, measured, and found imperfect. Allies' subtle interventions, phones raised discreetly, documents quietly passed, had magnified that vulnerability. If you've ever seen the power of unnoticed actions, comment and tag someone who needs to witness this story. LaToya moved forward, briefcase in hand, voice calm as she addressed reporters one last time. She emphasized collaboration, collective vigilance, and systemic awareness. Every gesture reinforced her presence while highlighting the contributions of bystanders, allies, and procedural safeguards. The moral was clear: victories against systemic bias weren't about heroics, they were about preparation, quiet persistence, and strategic engagement. The family's smiles were small, understated, but laden with relief and pride. Allies in the terminal subtly applauded, some with nods, others with quiet thumbs-ups. The ripple of micro-victories stretched outward, visible to anyone paying attention, yet almost invisible to those who had ignored the storm when it first began. Even Ryan Patterson seemed smaller in the presence of this coordinated, quiet power. Every attempt to reassert dominance was muted by the sheer procedural precision and collective agency LaToya had cultivated. It wasn't spectacle that dismantled authority, it was strategic, patient, collaborative observation. The cameras continued to capture the unfolding micro-victories, streaming live, uploading to social feeds, shared across networks. Each interaction, from LaToya's calm explanations to a simple passenger returning a misplaced boarding pass, contributed to a narrative of collective leverage. If you ever doubted the power of persistence and quiet strategy, hit like and subscribe to see it in action. The family moved together toward the exit, subtly framed by the press and allies. Each step was deliberate, each glance measured. The story of small victories, quiet interventions, and strategic collaboration had reached a peak. The terminal, once a place of tension and implicit bias, had been subtly transformed by procedural awareness and collective moral courage. Even after the family exited, the ripple continued. Passengers whispered, exchanged numbers, shared footage, and reflected on what they had witnessed. Small actions, layered together, had created leverage against systemic power and personal arrogance. This isn't just one family's story. Subscribe to see how preparation and collaboration turn moments of injustice into victories. By the time LaToya and her family reached the terminal doors, the air had changed. There was no applause, no fanfare, just the quiet recognition of what had been achieved. The airline had been challenged, authority questioned, and procedural leverage exercised successfully, without a single public outburst beyond necessity. The micro-victories, the quiet acts of allyship, the precise legal knowledge, the strategic coordination, had reshaped the balance of power. And as cameras captured the family leaving, as phones streamed the moment live, one truth became undeniable: systemic leverage is rarely loud, rarely immediate, but deeply effective when built on preparation, collaboration, and persistent, quiet vigilance. The terminal was finally quiet, but everyone could still feel what had happened. People stood in small groups, whispering and watching the family that refused to be pushed around. Phones lowered. Eyes followed. No one had forgotten the moment the system cracked in front of them. LaToya walked toward the exit with slow, steady steps. She didn't rush. She didn't hide. Her daughter, Naomi, held her hand tightly, and Jared guided their son on the other side. They looked tired, but they walked together, like a family that had survived something big. Some passengers nodded at them with respect. Others looked away, embarrassed they didn't speak up sooner. A few still recorded, wanting proof that courage actually looks like this: quiet, strong, and calm. LaToya paused at the sliding doors. Just for a moment. Not because she was scared. Because she knew this wasn't the end. Today, the airline bent. Today, the truth won. But tomorrow, someone else would face the same system. And she knew she couldn't fight every battle alone. Someone else would have to stand up, too. Someone watching. Maybe someone like you. The doors opened with a soft hiss. Warm evening light poured over the family as they stepped outside, four silhouettes walking together after a fight they didn't start, but refused to lose. Their shadows stretched long behind them, like the story itself wasn't done yet. Because here is the truth. Quiet courage is louder than any system built to break you. And if you were standing there, if you saw a family being pushed around, would you stay silent? Or would you stand up like they did? If you believe people deserve to stay together. If you believe families shouldn't be treated like that. Like, comment, and share this story, so more people know what really happens when someone finally says enough. And if you want to follow more stories where the system gets tested, hit subscribe. You saw their fight. Now the question is simple. What would you do next time?